Hello, choral arranging students. Today, the day I am recording this lecture is Monday, April 13th, 2020. At this point, you should have received back the last batch of corrections for your part writing and also for your rhythmic elaborations for RLE that you are preparing to use for your piano accompaniment in Project 2. Project 2, as a reminder, this project is due Monday, April 20th. That's a week from today. And please contact me either by phone, email, or if you're on campus or in the area, come visit me if you have any questions about that project. So while you are working on the project this week to get it done by next Monday, I am going to give you one more lecture here about some contrapuntal vocal textures when you're dealing with three-voice arrangement. Contrapuntal vocal textures, as you know, are distinct and different from the homophonic textures that I've already talked to you about the last few lectures. So we'll take a look at several examples for three-voice arrangements, and hopefully you will come up with some ideas that you can use either for the final project or for whenever you are teaching and arranging for choirs in the future. So to begin, one contrapuntal texture that I'd like you to be aware of is something called a figuration texture. Let me back up 1 second and say that when we talked about two-voice vocal textures for arrangements, we did not discuss figuration, even though it was mentioned in that chapter. But now, since we are dealing with three voices, I think it's time to discuss what a figuration texture is and take a look at an example of one in your textbook, and then also be able to perhaps listen to a few moments of an example as well. So, first of all, let's go ahead and define figuration as a non-continuous fragmentary line that adds rhythmic and melodic punctuation to the original melody. Okay. I'll say that again, even though you have the ability to stop and rewind to get that definition. Figurations for voices are non-continuous fragmentary lines that add rhythmic and melodic punctuation to a melody. Okay. That's exactly what they do. And in three-part arrangements, figurations often occur in two voices that are paired together in a note-against-note texture. And these figurated voices enter at points where there is little or no motion at all in the original melody. So if we wanted to distill some of the important points about figuration, this type of vocal texture, we would say that it is non-continuous, meaning it is fragmentary line. Okay. We would also say that it adds rhythmic and melodic punctuation to a melody. And, especially in three-part arrangements, as I just said, the figuration often occurs in two voices that are paired together. And I'd say the final point about figuration that we can list here is that it usually occurs in an arrangement where there's little or no motion in the original melody. Okay? Okay, so let's take a look at an example now to see if we can find these traits for the figuration vocal texture. On the top of page 136 in your textbook, if you take a look at example 9-8, this is an arrangement of the traditional tune Just a Closer Walk with Thee. And this arrangement, if you can't see very clearly from where you are, is arranged for two sopranos and alto voices. So we have soprano 1, soprano 2, and altos. It's a three-part vocal arrangement. We also have keyboard accompaniment down here as usual, but in this particular arrangement we also have a percussion line. Percussion line that adds obviously a little bit of rhythm and perhaps spice to the arrangement. Now, this is in the key of D flat major as it begins, and I do want to point out right away that the first sopranos are given the main melody. They have the slightly longer note values here, and they do in the next system as well. And while the first sopranos have the main melody, the second sopranos and the altos, they are paired together with figuration. Figuration. If I slide the example over just a little bit, you can see that the figuration here is the rhythm da 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 da. Da, 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 da. Okay. That's what they are, the second sopranos and the altos are sounding or singing in order to produce a little bit of rhythmic and melodic punctuation while the main melody has some longer note values. Before I leave this particular system here, I will point out that the way the piano or the keyboard accompaniment is notated, it looks like that the top notes of the keyboard accompaniment really support the notes of the main melody in the first sopranos. The keyboard accompaniment is not really doing a lot to support the figuration lines. And I don't think the piano accompaniment needs to do that either, because we have two voices paired doing the same thing with the figuration pattern, and only one line is singing the melody. However, these two paired lines together, they are not all by themselves. If you can see the bottom staff here for the percussion, you can see the rhythm that the percussion is sounding actually is matching with the rhythm of the figuration lines. One other thing I want to point out about this example before we listen to it is, notice how we talked about that figuration patterns are included normally when the melody has very little rhythmic activity or even no rhythmic activity. So you can see in the second system of this same example, there is hardly any rhythmic activity going on in the main melody, the soprano 1 line. So this figuration is actually a welcome sound to complement, and give rhythmic and melodic some kind of pitch activity while the melody line, it remains relatively static and not too much is happening there. Now, rather than me play either the vocal lines or the piano accompaniment for these examples, today I'd like to actually play some very brief recordings on YouTube of these examples. I have found all the examples that I'm lecturing about today on YouTube, and while they may not be the exact arrangement or the exact same types of voices, you will get the idea, and I think it's a lot better that you can hear accompaniment and rhythm and percussion and voices all sounding at once rather than me trying to play just one part at a time. So again, if you don't have your book out, please go ahead and open it up to page 136 and follow along with this example, because I'm going to change the screen to the YouTube video that sounds this passage. The group that's actually going to sing Just a Closer Walk with Thee, at least the passage that we're interested in, is the Concordia a cappella choir, and this is the choir that is found in Seward, Nebraska at Concordia University. So there you have it. Hopefully you heard the melody line distinct in the first sopranos as opposed to the second sopranos and altos that had the figuration patterns down below. One other thing I do want to mention about this, and let me go back to the example in a second here, is to mention the text. I forgot to say something about the text. Generally, the text given to the figuration patterns is going to come from, or else be somewhat related to, the text of the main melody. And you can see in this first system of the example, the text of the main melody is Just a Closer Walk with Thee. And that's exactly what the figuration voices are singing for each of their rhythmic patterns. They sing Just a Closer Walk here, they sing Just a Closer Walk here, and down below they say the same things again and again. I think there are a few figuration patterns that allow them to say Just a Closer Walk with Thee, but for the most part, Just a Closer Walk is the related item to the text of the main melody that's used for the figuration voices. On page 138 in your text, there is one more example that illustrates figuration texture, figuration technique. And here we have the melody is given actually to the altos in a soprano-alto baritone texture. Soprano-alto baritone vocal texture. Once again, even though the melody is given to the altos in this example, once again, the figuration is actually found in two paired voices. In this case, the soprano voice is paired with the baritone voice, and they are sharing the figuration. So, what we have here is, I should also mention here, the piano accompaniment actually supports the figuration voices here rather than the main melody. If you can see the rhythm from either where you're sitting in your own text or you can see the rhythm on the screen, the rhythm of the piano accompaniment is more similar to the rhythm of the soprano and the baritone voices, which have the figuration patterns. Okay. In this case, the text that is used for the figuration pattern is just, it's not a neutral syllable, it actually is a word, it's just part of the word hallelujah, where they're singing hallelujah. So it's not necessarily derived from or taken from the text of the melody in the alto voice. However, it is related because the alto voice main text is talking about gonna build a heaven. In fact, that's almost the name of this arrangement. The arrangement is entitled Gonna Build a Mountain, but in this particular passage they're talking about gonna build a heaven from a little hell. Okay? So there is kind of a loose relationship between the text of the figuration patterns and the text of the main melody. I'd like to also point out this. We talked about figuration is best used in the non-melodic voices when the melody has little or no rhythmic activity. Well, you can see that after a couple measures here in the main melody, the rhythmic activity kind of holds, prolongs, and stays stagnant. And exactly when we have a dotted quarter tied to a half note, that's when the figuration patterns enter in the soprano and the baritone. Same thing a couple measures later. We have no rhythm, no sound going on in the main melody at the end of measure 4, and that's exactly when the figuration patterns come in, again to punctuate and give a little more rhythmic and melodic pizzazz to the arrangement rather than just waiting until the measure ends if all we had was the main melody. The system below in the same example is more of the same. We have little to no rhythmic activity for the syllable N for heaven. And we have the figuration pattern with hallelujah coming in. And at the very end of the example, we have a long whole note tied to a quarter note. Very little rhythmic activity going on there. And we have another figuration pattern with the words hallelujah. So again, I'm going to play this example through a YouTube video, and I have to change the screen as you know, so please follow along with the whole example on page 138 in your textbook. Since this example is pretty quick, I'm going to play it one more time. And I do want you to note that this is an all-male, I believe it's high school level choir. It's not the exact arrangement that we have in our textbook for SAB. However, you can hear the melody clearly, and in this case the piano is providing more of the figuration punctuation rather than another set of voices. So see if you can hear those two things as I play it one more time. To me, the figuration really adds a lot to those spots where in the melody there is little or no rhythmic activity going on. The next thing I'd like to talk about with you for a few minutes is another contrapuntal vocal texture. And we did talk about this vocal texture when we were dealing with two-voice arrangements. And this vocal texture deals with the all-famous ostinato again. I know ostinato is one of your favorite musical terms this semester, and certainly one of your favorite textures for this class this semester. But let's go ahead and quickly review again what an ostinato is. An ostinato is a 1 or 2 measure repeated motive. And by motive I mean it's a pitch and rhythmic pattern. Again, 1 or 2 measures long that's repeated over and over again. What the ostinato does is it reiterates a single phrase of text. So again, rather than putting a full-fledged definition down, because you can always rewind the tape and watch it again, let's point out some of the essential features or characteristics of an ostinato. Okay? It's usually a 1 to 2 measure repeated motive. And again, when I talk about motive in this case, I'm referring to a pitch and a rhythmic pattern. So we'll just write that in here. So that's what an ostinato is, and let's not forget that it usually reiterates a single phrase of text. We did an assignment on an ostinato many weeks ago this semester with the text, "My horses ain't hungry." Okay. Now, like the figuration pattern, the ostinato texture, when you're dealing with a 3-voice arrangement, usually the ostinato is, well, it actually can be one of 2 ways. Usually you have 2 voices paired and 1 voice doing its own thing in the 3-voice texture with an ostinato. Either 2 voices are paired containing the melody, or you have 1 voice with the melody and 2 voices are paired together with the ostinato pattern. Okay. So it's kind of an either-or situation. Again, either 2 voices are sounding the melody, working on that together, probably in a note against note texture, and 1 voice has the ostinato, or the reverse is true. 2 voices are paired with the ostinato, again probably with a note against note texture, and 1 voice has the melody. So the example in your text that illustrates the ostinato texture in a 3-voice arrangement, as you can see, it is found on page 140, and it is example 910, and this is an arrangement of a tune called "Button Up Your Overcoat." Now, several things to observe and point out about this texture before we listen to the example. We have an arrangement for soprano, alto, baritone, so SAB, 3-voice arrangement, and it looks like the ostinato pattern is actually being paired in 2 of the voices. The melody is not sounding in 2 of the voices, it's just 1 voice, but the ostinato is paired in 2 voices. And those 2 voices are the soprano and the alto voices. The ostinato pattern is basically this nice rhythmic figure that goes doodle-doo-doo, doodle-doo-doo, and then it repeats again. Doodle-doo-doo, doodle-doo-doo. Okay. The soprano and the altos are not singing in unison. The texture that was chosen for the ostinato pattern in these 2 combined voices is a note against note texture. Okay? So the altos are actually sounding a 1/3 lower than the sopranos to bring out this ostinato pattern, which repeats over and over again. The text for this ostinato is basically a nonsense or a neutral type of syllable. We have doodle-oo-doo, doodle-oo-doo. I couldn't make it any better if you asked me to choose lyrics myself. But so, a note against note setting. The alto is a 1/3 below the sopranos, and the ostinato is paired or combined between the soprano and the alto voices. Now, that leads us to talk about, well, where's the melody? Well, initially, and this is at the very beginning of the arrangement, initially there is no melody. In fact, we could have some voices that are producing this nonsense syllable or neutral syllable, choo-choo, or you could even have a percussion type instrument performing that along with the ostinato. It is not until measure 5, down on the bottom system, where the main melody enters, and that is in the baritone voice. So in the next system, while the soprano and alto voices are still reiterating their ostinato pattern, the main melody, which is in the baritone voice, comes in the second beat of measure 5, after there's a little bit of rhythmic punctuation there. And again, a great text for this as the melody comes in. The opening text is ba 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 boo wah. Again, I didn't write it, I did an arrangement, but it has, I guess, kind of like a, well, when we listen to it, it kind of has a jazz rhythm and a jazz kind of tone to it going on. One other thing I do want to say before we listen to this example is, do you see any connection between the ostinato, sung by the soprano and the alto, and at least the opening of the main melody? There actually is a unifying link between them. And that is this rhythmic pattern, long, short, long. Da, 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 da. Here we have, in the main melody, da, 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 da. So there is, at least at the outset, or the inception of the main melody, starting on beat 2 in measure 5, there is a connection between the rhythm here and the rhythm that's used for the ostinato that's reiterated over and over again. So that's kind of nice whenever you can kind of unify, even though voices are doing different things. If you can find ways to unify either with pitch motives, intervals, or even, again, with rhythmic motives, as we do have here, that is kind of a nice touch. And incidentally, the pitches are not that far off either, even though they might not, well, actually, I guess they would be exact. The first 3 pitches of the melody, C, B natural, C, are the same as the first 3 pitches of the soprano's ostinato pattern, C, B, C. So there's a rhythmic and a pitch element being linked together there. This example, as you can see by looking at your own book, actually encompasses 2 pages. We got pages 140 and 141. And again, not that the recordings that I found on YouTube are the greatest, but I'm going to play a recording on YouTube so you can hear how this goes. Obviously, I can't choose any recording on YouTube because the recording that's on YouTube of Button Up Your Overcoat has to be this arrangement, at least, the one that's arranged by Silva, Brown, and Henderson, and Bessig. Once again, it does go pretty quick. However, if you do want to listen to that again, you can always rewind this lecture and listen to it again. Or you can just go on YouTube yourself and you can type it in the search box, Button Up Your Overcoat, arranged by someone named Bessig, and I think that's enough information to bring at least this recording up. This recording, as you can see, is for an all-female group. It is not for soprano, alto, and baritone like our example in the book is. So the last contrapuntal texture I'd like to discuss today is dealing with imitation once again. And we have talked about imitation earlier this semester in connection with two-voice arrangements. So in three-voice arrangements, when an imitative texture occurs, a motive or an idea is stated in one voice, and then it is repeated by another voice, not the same voice again, but by another voice, either at the same pitch level or a different pitch level. So we can say that with imitation we have to have at least an initial motive or idea. And once that is initially stated in one voice, then it is repeated by another voice. Okay? Motive or idea that is repeated by another voice, either at the same pitch level or at a different pitch level. So that's a good way to define imitation or imitative vocal textures. Now, one thing that we can also point out about imitation is that you do not have to imitate the entire motive or idea that was stated at the outset. It's not necessary to imitate the whole statement that was intended to be imitated, okay? So I'll just write down here that the entire motive or idea does not need to be imitated. Only part of it can be imitated, and you still have imitation. Okay. So even if you have imitation occurring in other voices for just part of an initial motive or idea, that's enough, that's fine. You can still, the audience member can still hear the imitation when at those imitative entrances. Okay? So we have one example in our textbook, and that's going to be example 911 on page 142. And we'll take a look at how the imitation is treated in that example for, again, three-voice arrangement. So in example 911 on page 142, we have a few measures from an arrangement of Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho. This is arranged by someone named Williamson. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the way this is laid out, or the format of this arrangement. On the top staff, we actually have two soprano voices. The sopranos are divided here between soprano 1 and soprano 2, and they're both sharing, those two voices, they're both sharing the same staff. Okay? The way, obviously, we can visually see the difference, and also hear the difference between the two sopranos sharing the same staff, is that the soprano 1s have their stems up for their pitches, and soprano 2 have their stems pointing downward for their pitches. Okay. Then we also have an alto voice with its own staff, just the altos all singing from the same staff. And we also have a piano accompaniment, which I'm not planning to talk about too much for this example, but the main activity, the interest in this particular passage is all found in the voices. We have the first sopranos start out and actually, because the two sopranos are sharing the top staff, soprano 1's text is written above the staff, whereas the soprano 2 text is written below the staff. And again, if you can see from your vantage point this screen, or if you can see in your own textbook, there are, in this 4/4 common time meter, there are 2 beats right at the beginning where the sopranos start out, but the first soprano's initial motive or idea actually lasts about a measure and a half. Again, that's their initial idea that's going to be imitated in the other voices. So before the first sopranos are even done with their initial motive or idea, second sopranos actually come in the second half of measure 1. And they're actually coming in at the exact same pitch level that this first soprano started with. They're singing ya da 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 da. Now, is the imitation exact all the way through for this initial idea that the first sopranos gave us? No, it's not exact, but it's very close. And the ear will have no trouble hearing the imitation, especially because most of it is intact. The second sopranos have the eighth notes, ya da 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 da, and they also have the syncopated rhythm that the first sopranos did, ya da da, even though the pitches aren't exactly the same. The first sopranos here have ya da da, and then the second sopranos have ya da da. They just arpeggiate down the E minor triad. Okay, so there's definite imitation going on there. And by the way, the distance or the interval, the time interval between when one voice states something and then another voice imitates it, it's usually not very long. In this case, it's only a few beats. You could generally wait maybe a measure or up to 2 measures before imitation, at least in vocal arrangements. In instrumental arrangements, you can certainly wait a little longer before the imitation starts. But I think this is very good because the listener does not have much time to forget what he or she has just heard. And then the imitation commences. Finally, in the third voice, the alto voice, we also have imitation once again. But even less of the original motive that the soprano 1s initially sounded. Even less of that motive is imitated in the altos. Basically, all we have is ya da 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 da, and that's about it. So again, it's okay that the entire motive from the first sopranos was not imitated in the altos. We at least get the first 5 pitches, and the rhythm is the same for at least those first 5 pitches. We have do, ti, do, re, mi. That is enough for the listener to be aware of the imitation. After the imitation breaks off at the end of this measure, the vocal parts actually resort to more of a homophonic texture, which is a little bit choppy. But yeah, imitation doesn't have to last very long. In this case, it only lasts for about 2 measures, and then the texture becomes homophonic. In other instances, other arrangements, the imitation could last a little bit longer. And again, as I said before, the imitation doesn't have to start so closely to the initial motive or idea. There can be a little more time lag in between the initial idea and the imitation, but that seems to work pretty well for this particular arrangement. Now, for the listening example, I have this on YouTube once again, and I believe the recording that I have on YouTube that I will show you and let you hear is actually from a all-female middle school level choir, middle school level. So again, soprano, 2 sopranos and alto, that's going to be true. However, I think this is a middle school choir, just so you know the level. So again, it goes by very quickly, and it may be a little hard to hear, but it is at the middle school level. It's obviously not, you know, the premium sound. It actually says here, 2013 Lincoln County All-County Middle School Honors Choir performs Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho arranged by Williamson. And it says who the directors and accompanists are and stuff like that. Let me go ahead and rewind it and play it just one more time since it goes really quick, and see if you can pick out the very fast imitation. And again, you can, if you want to YouTube this yourself, just type in the search box, Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho, arranged Williamson, and I think it's one of the first results there that you can find it. So, that's going to basically conclude this lecture for this week. You will not need to use any of these contrapuntal textures that I just talked about in your Project 2. You have the handout for that and all the specific instructions as to what 2 vocal textures I'd like you to use for Project 2. So, speaking of Project 2, you do not have any separate assignment or homework for this week, because your homework assignment is to work on Project 2. I want you to get that as done as you can, as finalized as you can, because it is technically due a week from today, Monday, April 20th. So again, please contact me in any way, shape, or form that works best for you. If you have any questions or need any help on that project. Otherwise, if I don't hear from you, I'll assume that things are progressing. Maybe not splendidly, but they are at least progressing and you're getting toward the finish line. Okay, so let's stop it at that, and I hope you have a good week if I don't see you for another class lecture. And until next time.